Hi friends, continuing to the chapter The People of Spark. The first town meeting. While Lena slept, the three town leaders were holding a meeting. They sat at a table in the tower room of the town hall, which looked out over the plaza. Mary's hands were clasped tightly in front of her. Ben scowled, his grey eyes bunched together, deepening the two lines between them. Wimmer pulled nervously on one ear and looked from Mary to Ben and back to Mary. They can't stay here, said Mary. There are too many of them. Where would we put them? How would we feed them? Yes, said Wilma. Where can they go? No one spoke. They had no answer of that questions. Outside the settlement of Sparks, the empty lands stretched for miles in all the directions. They could go up to the Pine Gap, said the Wimmel. Maybe. Mary nodded and shook her head. Don't be ridiculous, she said. That's at least 2 weeks' walk away. How could these feeble people, travel that far? How could they carry enough food with them? Where would they get enough food? Unless we emptied our storehouse and gave them everything. Glimmer nodded, knowing she was right. The people of Sparks knew of only 3 other settlements, and they are heard from the rumors that those places were smaller and poorer than Sparks. The inhabitant wouldn't want an extra mouth to feed either. The three of them gazed out the window and down on an moonlight plaza, filled with the strange sleeping people from a city under the earth. 400 of them with no food, no possession to speak of, and nowhere to go. What I fail to understand, said Bain, is why this particular misfortune has happened to us. He paused, looked into the air to his left, and frowned. This was a habit of his. He seems to need a pause and a frown every now and then to put together his thoughts. Wimler and Mary had gotten us used to waiting through their pauses. I don't see that we deserve it. Ben went on after a second, having labored as delighted as we have. Unjust we have started to propose at least after so many of years. Well, adversity is a mild word for it. The others nodded, thinking of the hard years they have been winter when the people shivered in the tents and ate the chalked up roots and shivered nuts. There have been years of a drought and a plague of tomato worms and the devastating crop failure that mean the people had nothing to eat for months but the cabbages and the potatoes. There had been the times when the people had to work so hard to stay alive that they sometimes died just from being too tired to go on. No one wanted to go back to those things. So what can we do? Said Mary. If they can't stay and they can't go, what is the right thing to do? The other sat silently. Well, there is the finer, said Wilma, as a temporary solution. True, said Ben. A good thought, said Mary, and Wilma beamed. So what about this? Mary went on. Well, let them stay in Pioneer. We will give them water and food. We don't have some extra in the storeroom. In exchange, they work. They help in the field. They help in the building. They do whatever there is to do. We would have to teach them how. As far as I can see, they know nothing. After a while, when they are strong and when they know better how to get along, they can move on. They can set up their own village somewhere else. We will have to watch them carefully if we let him stay with Ben. They are strange. We don't know what they might do. They seem fairly ordinary to me, said Mary. Except for the business about the living in a cave. You believe that? Said Ben. Mary shrugged. This question is, shall we let them stay? How long would we have to keep them? Asked Wilma. Before they were ready to go. I don't know. Maybe 6 months. Let's see, it is nearer the end of an flowering now. Mary counted out the months on her fingers shining, burning, browning, cooling, falling, chilling. They could stay through the summer and a fall season and leave at the end of chilling. That would mean that they have been on their own for the winter, Blimmer pointed out. That's right, said Ben. Are you suggesting we should keep them even longer? We will be stretching ourselves to keep them at all. They fall silent again, considering this. Finally, Mary spoke. Shall we let them stay for 6 months then? She said, and teach them as much as we can. No one really liked this idea. They thought of a food the refugees would need, which would mean a less for their own people, and the bother of teaching them all the skill they needed to survey on their own. Each one, Mary, Wilma, and especially Ben, wished the unfortunate cave people would simply vanish. But they weren't going to vanish, and the leaders of the Sparks knew that they must, for the sake of their coincidence, do the right thing. They wanted to be wise, good leaders, unlike the leaders of the past, whose terrible mistake had led to the disaster. So they would be open minded. They won't be generous. With this in the mind, the three leaders voted. Mary voted yes, the cave people should stay. Ben voted yes, reluctantly. Wilmer voted yes. So it was agreed. They would give them a place to stay. They would help them for 6 months. After that, the stranger would have to take care of themselves. Mary, Ben, and Wilmer shook hands on him this agreement, but none of them said out loud what they were thinking. That even after the 6 months, the people of an ember would be hard pressed to start a town. The founder of a spark had known carpentry and farming, and even so, it has taken them 2 years to build a rough shelter and get the rocks out of a field. They had known how to manage animals and build the good soil. But still, their animals sometimes died of diseases and hunger in the many years when the crops failed. They don't know how to keep the expect the harsh weather, wolves, and the bandit, and still they had suffered losses from all three. The town leaders knew in their hearts that in this vast, empty country where there were 1,000 dangerous, the people of Ember did not understand. They would never be able to take care of themselves. The finer. In the village of the next morning, Crisis ran through the street calling to the people of Sparks. They told them to bring out all their old blankets, pillows, towels, and rags, and any clothes they had no longer needed. They were to heap these on the street in the front of their houses. From the storehouse, people collected the food, things that didn't need to be cooked, like apples from the pure fall and dried apricots and the bread and the big hunk of an cheese. Don't who had who had gotten up the first sign of a light in the sky watched these preparations with writing excitements. By the midday, a caravan was moving southward out of a village. It was composed of a strange vehicle that the villagers called truck wagon, or just the trucks. They were made of rusty metals and had a 4 fat black wheels. At the front was a boxy part like a metal chest with a rounded top, and behind that was a higher box with the 2 seats in it where the driver sat. The back of a truck was flat. This was where the crates of an supplies were loaded. Attached to each of these trucks by the sturdy ropes were the two big, squarish, muscular animals, by the far the most enormous animals Doon had ever seen. They made snuffing the noises and sometimes a low sort of a groan. What are they? Doon asked someone walking near him. Oxen, the man answered. Like cows, that milk come from. Doon had never heard of cows. He had thought milk came from the powder in the box. He didn't say this, of course. He just nodded. And what does the Turk mean? He asked. he understood the wagon parts. The man looked surprised. It just mean the truck. He says, you know what people used to drive in the old days? There are millions of them. Trucks, cars everywhere. They used to run on their own without oxen. They had the engines in there. He rapped on the front of a truck. You power the stuff called the gasoline of the engine, and it made the wheel turn. Now, since we don't have a gasoline anymore, we take the engines out, and that makes the truck light and easy to pull. Doon didn't ask what his glassing was. He didn't want to show that his ignorance all at once. He had spread his questions around, find out just a few things from one person at a time. He and his father walked along together beside one of the trucks. Doon has expected Lena to be with him. But by the time the caravan left, she hadn't come. That was all right. She would easily find out where they had gone and come later. Doon's father still had snore muscles from the long walk of a day before, so Doon soon went ahead of him. He was bursting with the energy and the joy and simply could not walk slowly. He took deep breath of an sweet smelling morning air. Over his head the sky was deep, clear blue, 1,000 times bigger than the black lid that had covered the ember, and around him the green and the golden land seems to stretch away without end. Doon kept wondering where the edges were. He made his way to the front of the procession and asked the Vlimmer, who was torching along with his arms swinging gently. Edges, said the Vlimmer, glancing down. Yes, I mean, if I were standing way over there, he pointed to the horizon, where the skies seems to meet the land. Would I be at the edge of this place? And what would beyond the edge? There is no edge, said Vlimmer, looking at the Doon as if he must have something wrong with him. The earth is sphere, a huge round ball. If you kept going and going, you would eventually come back to where you started. This nearly knocked the breath out of Doon. It was so strange and hard to compare. He thought at the first that Vlimmer was playing a joke on him, thinking he was a fool, but Vlimmer's expression was patiently puzzled, not sly. He must be telling the truth. There was a million mysteries here, Doon thought. He would explore them all. He would learn everything. That morning he had already learned the words sun, tree, wind, star, and birds. He had learned dog, chicken, goat, and bread. He had never in his life felt so sad, so good. He felt as huge as that land around him, and as clear and bright as the air. No laboring in the dank tunnels here. No running through the dark streets to escape the purest. Now he was out in the open, free, and he was powerful, too, in a way he hadn't been before. He had done something remarkable, saved his people from the dying city, and along with Lena. He would be known for that the deed all his life. He gazed around at this new world full of life and beauty, and he felt proud to have brought his people here. The road passed through the two latest houses of a village and ran along the river, which was wide and slow, with the grasses behind along with its bank. The trucks rattled, clouds of dust billowed from their wheels. All around Doon roses, a pebble of a voice, as people pointed the things out in the tones of astonishment. Look, something white floating in the sky. Did you see the little animal with a big tail? Do you feel that the air is moving? Children darted everywhere with the way, daring each other to touch the both sides of the oxen, pulling blossoms from the bumpers at the edge of the road, jumping onto the trucks for a quickly ride until they were sure off again. And the sun shone down on everyone. The people of an ember loved the strange feeling of a heat on the top of their heads. They put their hats up on often to touch their warm hair. The road went up a gentle rise and around a clumps of trees. Here we are, cried the villain, sweeping his arms out proudly. The Pioneer Hotel. At the crest of a slope stood a big building, bigger than any Doon had ever seen. It was a 3 stories high and a very long, with a wing at each and a perpendicular to the main parts. Windows marched in the 3 rows across its wall. In the center, overlooking a long field that sloped down to the river, as what must once have been a great entrance. Wide step, a roof held up, column, a double doorway, but the building was grand no more. It was very old. Doon could tell. Its walls were grey and stained. Most of the windows were no marked than the dark holes. The roof has sagged inwards in some places. Grass grew right up to the steps and further down at the some other end. Doon could see that there is a tree had fallen against the building and smashed a corner of it. Ben Barlow stalked across the wide, weedy field in the front of an hotel and climbed the steps. Wilmer followed. He leaned against a column and Ben took a position on the top step and waited for the crowd of refugees to assemble before him. Doon walked among the people until he found his father again, and they stood together. Ben held up both the hands and called the attention, "Please." The crowd grew silent. "Welcome to your new home, the Pioneer Hotel," he said. A cheers arose from the crowd. Ben frowned and held up both hands. Ben Barlow stalked across the wide, weedy winds in the front of a hotel and climbed the steps. Wilmer followed. He leaned against a column and the Ben took a position on the top step and waited for the crowd of refuge to assemble before him. Doon wove among the people until he found his father again and they stood together. Ben held up both the hands and called, "Attention please." The crowd grew silently. "Welcome to your new home, the Pioneer Hotel," he said. A cheer arose from the crowd. Ben frowned and held up both the hands, palms out, and the cheers died away. "It was a temporary home only," he said. "We cannot, of course, keep you here in the Sparks on a permanent basis. To do so would severely strain our resources and know about the causes resistment and the deprivation among our people." Ben cleared his throat and frowned into the air. Then he went on, "We have decided you to stay with here for 6 months, through summer and fall to the end of a month of the chilling. After that time, with the training you will receive from us, you will go out into the empty lands and found a village of yours own." The people of Ember glanced at each other in the surprise. Found their own village? Some of them smiled eagerly at this idea. Others looked uncertain. The city of Ember has been constructed for them. All they had ever had to do was a repair work as the building got older. They had never built anything from the scratch. But Doon said to himself, "Thinking about all this, I am sure we could learn." Ben went on. "The Pioneer Hotel have a 75 rooms," he said, "plus a big dining room, a ballroom, office, and a lobby. There will be an adequate space for everyone." Excited murmurs swept through the crowd. Doon started downing the math in his head. 417 people divided by 75 rooms equals 5 or 6 people per room. The sounded crowded, but maybe they were the big rooms. And then there was a dining room and a ballroom. Whatever that was, maybe those who would hold the 10 or 20 people. Now, of course, this building was somewhat less than a full functional. Ben went on, "You won't have to water pumps here, as we do in the villages, but the river is close just down the slope, and the water is clean. The river will provide you water for drinking, bathing, and washing the clothes. Your toilet will be outside. You will start digging them tomorrow. Once we have organized you in the works team, today you will settle into your rooms." He paused, frowning. The 2 lines between his eyebrows deepened. "There was not much furniture kept in the room," he said. Maybe a few rooms still have the beds, but I think we have taken most of them by now. You will be sleeping on the floors. Sleeping on the floors? The voice came from somewhere behind Doon. It's a tone of somewhere between the outrage and amused disbelief. Doon turned around to see who is that. In the middle of a crowd, he spotted a tall boy, a young man really, who seems to be standing up on something, maybe a rock or a tree stump. So he would look out the people's head. He was handsome in a sharp-edged way. His jaws was square-cornered. His shoulders were straight as a board. His dark hair was combed back from his face and slided down. So his head looked neat and round and hard, and his eyes were as pale as the bits of an sky. Doon recognized this boy, though he didn't know him. His name was Mick or Trick or Mac or something like that. On the floor, yes, said Ben, but we will give you as many blankets as we can. The boy Sharp's voice come again, rising above the others. One more question, sir. What about the food? The question rippled through the crowd. Yes, food. What will we eat? Ben raised his voice. Please listen, he shouted. Listen. All the faces turned towards him again. Doon could see the Ben's eyes were fixed on the boy with a sharp voice. Ben had the look of a teacher speaking to a slightly unruly classes. Eating will work this way, he said. You will be assigned to household in the villages, 4 or 5 people to the each houses. At noontime you will go there for your main meal. He paused and frowned. As for the breakfast and dinner, your lunchtime family will give you a food to take away with you. Some to eat in the evening, and some to save for the next morning. They will be as generous as they can. But remember, we do not have an abundance of extra food. Your arrival means less for anyone. He gazed at the crowd for a moment and took a long breath. Is that clear? He said. Any questions? No one spoke for a moment, and then the tall boy said, No, sir, lead on. So Ben led the way into the lobby of an ancient pioneer hotel. Doon and his father stayed close together. Stepping carefully, it was hard to see. The only light came from the doorway behind them and from a hole in a great dirt-enclosed glass dome 3 stories above their head. The door was splintered with the chunk of an fallen plaster and gritty with the dirt that had blown in over the years. This place needs work, Doon whispered to his father. His father brushed a spider web away from his face. Yes, he said, but we are lucky to be here. We could be sleeping on the ground. Ben led them down a hall to the left, to a vast room with the high windows where the dusty sunshine slanted across the broken tiles of the floor. This was the dining room. Ben called out. Doon saw only a few chairs lying in the other side, most of them with a leg broken or missing. Beyond the dining room was a room even more immense, with a raised platform at one end, a high ceiling, and a wooden floor. The ballroom, Ben said. In the early years before the disasters, musicians sat up there on the stage. People danced out there. At the greatest high windows hung a tatters of an faded rose-colored cloth that had been curtains years only. Smells moodily in here. It was that boy again. His clear, sharp voice carried over the other voices, even though it was much louder. Reminds me of the home. People laughed. It was true. The smell of a mold was common in the underground city of Ember. There was a bit of comfort in it. Doon suddenly remembered the name of his tall boy, who kept speaking out. It was Tick Tick, Tick Hassler. In Ember, Doon recalled, Tick has been an hauler. He had pulled a cart full of procedure from the greenhouse to the storage, and the garbages from the store out to the trash heaps. Doon hadn't known him then, but remembering seeing him pulling his loading cart with his whole long body stand forward and freeze grin to effect on his face. He pulled his cart faster than anyone else. Ben led them to the stairs, and then they climbed to the floors above. Long, dim corridors lined with the doors stretched the length of the buildings. Some of the doors were open. Doon looked through them as he passed. All the rooms were more or less the same. Windows across one wall, a stained and unfaded carpet, a couple of broken lamps lying on the floor, a few of the rooms has a bed, and several had the other furnitures, just with their drawers hanging crudely out, and tables as a chair or two. He stepped into some of the rooms and found that they had the bathroom as well, with the rusting sinks and bathtubs where that were homes to the spiders. For the next couple of hours, people swam through the corridors, up and down the stairs, calling to each other as they are close to their rooms and decided whom to share them with. People grouped together, chose a room, then changed their minds and teamed up with another group. Shouts rang throughout the hall. Jack, down here. No, this one is better. It has a chair. Mama, where are you? This room is full. No more people. Don't hear the Dick's voice ringing out over the other now and then. He wondered which room he was choosing and who he was choosing to live with. Finally, everyone was settled. Doon and his father chose a room on the second floor, room number 215, along with two other people. One was Edward's Pocket, who has been Ember's librarian. He was a friend of Doon's in a way. He was old and an often crabby, but he liked Doon, who has been a frequent visitor to the library. The other was an Skadge Merrill, the man who had tried to venture out into an unknown region beyond the city of Ember. For a while after the experiences, he had got out of his mind with a fright and ravaged in Harwin Square about the monster and the doom. He had recovered somewhat since then. In the spite of his terror, he had managed to climb into one of the boats that took people out of the city to the new world. But he was still a fearful, trembling sort of a person. Nearly everything about these unfamiliar places scared him. He refused to go near the window of their new room. Something might come in, he said. There are the things here that fly. The four of them set to work fixing up the room. It was full of cobwebs. Two of their three windows were broken, and bits of dry leaves and splinters of glass littered the carpet. It also had a dresser with three drawers, a papered armchair with a sunken seat, and two end tables with a lamp. They took their socks off and used them as a dust rag to sweep away the cobwebs. They picked up the leaves and the glass and tossed them out the window. They put the lamps out in the hall. They were useless, of course, since there was no electricity, and they lined up the dresser and end table in the middle of a room to make a sort of wall, diving the spaces into two. There was enough room for the Doon and his father to spread his blanket on the floor on one side, and Sat to spread his on the other. Edward Pocket, who was very short, decided to spread his blanket on the floor of a largest closet, which had a sliding door. He said he didn't mind being silently crumpled. He liked the privacy. That night, Doon didn't sleep much. He lay on his folded blanket and stared up through that window at the dark sky. His mind teemed with the possibilities, so much to do so, much to learn. He felt suddenly older and stronger, though it had been less than a week since he had left Ember. But he was a new person in this new world. He would do new things and be friends with the new people. Maybe he thought, remembering the voice that he had stood out above the others that day. He had been a friend with Dick. Breakfast with disaster. Lena's first morning in the doctor's house did not go well. Poppy was still sleeping when she awakened, and so was Mrs. Murdo. So she got up earlier quietly, but put on the same picker stuck clothes she had been wearing the day before, and went out the streets. The doctor was standing by the table in what must have been her night gown, a patched brown sack that hung to her knees. The hair at the back of her head was striking up. She was leafing through a big books that lays on the table. Oh, said the doctor, saying, Lena, you are up. I was just looking for. I was trying to find, well, I suppose it is time for breakfast. The doctor's kitchen looked like a complete mess to Lena. In embers, the kitchen had been spared, stocked with only what was needed. Some shelves, an electric stove, a refrigerator, but in Hader's kitchen, there were a thousand of things. Wide wooden counter ran along the two sides, and on a counter was a jumble of jugs and the pans and the tubs and the pitchers, big spoons and the knives and the scoops and the jars and a bottle full of things that looked like the pebbles and the brown powders and a tiny white teeth. There was a basket filled up with the vegetables Lena had never seen before. In the corner squatted a buckling black iron box. She thought it might be a cabinet since there was a door in its front. Well, see if we have an egg in the morning, said Dr. Hessler. That would be a start. Torren apparently suddenly from the other room. Eggs, he cried. I want one. Eggs. Lena didn't know what that it meant. She followed the doctor and Torren through a door that led outside. Beyond the door was a place like an open air version of an embers greenhouse. Only the plants growing here were far bigger and wilder, cloning and twinning and shooting upwards with a tremendous energy. Lena recognized some of them. Bean vines climbed up the frames of a netting, tomato vine grew on in wooden towers, chard and acclaim plants spurted up like the big green fountains. In among the rows of plants, some flatted up, two-legged creature of a kind she had seen on her way into the town yesterday waggled along, poking at the ground with a sharp thing like a tooth that stuck out from their faces. What are these? Asked Lena. Chickens, said the doctor. We will check their nest and see if they have left us anything. She bent down and went through a door of an wooden hut in the back of a garden, and when she came out, she had sped vipers in her hair and a white ball in her hand, not a round ball, but one that looked as if it had been stretched sideways. Just one today, she said. I want it, cried Torren. No, said the doctor. You have plenty of eggs. This is one for our guest. She handed the egg to Lena, who took it gingerly. It was smooth and warm. She had no idea what it was. It felt more like a stone than the food. What it is, some sort of an large bean, or a food with a hard white peel. Thank you, she said doubtfully. See, she doesn't even want it, Torren said. She doesn't even know what it is. He gave her a hard shove, making her stagger sideways. Quite that, cried Lena. You almost pushed me over, Torren said to the doctor, stretching out a hand, but Torren ignored her. I will push you again, he said, and he did harder. Lena stumbled backward and caught herself just in time to keep from falling in the cabbage bed. She felt a flashy of fury. She raised her arms and threw the eggs at Torren and hit him on the shoulders, but instead of bouncing off, it broke open, and a slimy yellow mess dripped down his shirts. Now look what you have done, Torren screamed. It's ruined. He put his head down as if it runs at Lena and but her. But the doctor grabbed his arm. Stop this, she said. Lena was horrified, disgusted too. That yellow goop was something people ate. She was glad that she didn't have to, but she felt stupid for what she has done. I'm sorry, I wrecked the egg, she said. I didn't know what it was. You wrecked my shirt too, shouted the Torren, wriggling in the door's gaps. But you punished me, Lena said. Well said the doctor in a weary voice. That is how it goes, doesn't it? Someone pushes back. Pretty soon everything ruined. Everything, said Lena, but can't his shirts be washed? Oh, Yes, of course, the doctor said. I didn't mean that. Never mind. She let go to Torren. I guess we will have a bread and an aperitif for the breakfast. Mrs. Mrudo had come downstairs now, leaving the still sleeping Poppy in the bed. They all had the breakfast together. Lena ate 5 apricots. She loved them for the taste and the feel for them. Too, their rosy orange skin were velvety like a baby's cheek. She also liked the bread, which was toasted with crunchy, and the jam, which was dark purple and sweet. Mrs. Murundo kept saying, My, this is tasty, and asking the question about what bread was made of, and what a blackberry looks like, and why the apricots have a sort of an wooden rock in the middle. Dr. Hisler seemed a bit flummoxed by these questions, but she did her best to explain. She was nice, Lena decided, but distracted. Her mind seems to be else somewhere. She didn't notice that the Torrent was putting all his apricots bit into his pocket, for instance, or maybe she didn't care. When the breakfast was over, Torrent went up to the loft and came back down carrying a bulking bag. There was many things, he said loudly. I don't want anyone touching them. He knelt down and opened the door of an cabinet under the window seat and thrust the bag inside. Gasper came, gave them to me, and anyone who touches them get in a big trouble. He closed the cabinet door and glared at Lena. What an awful boy, Lena thought. How could nice Dr. Hester had such an horrified son? Lena had thought she would go back to the plaza and find Doon right after the breakfast, but she changed her mind when she put upstairs to waken her little sister. Poppy seemed so sick that Lena was frightened. She didn't want to leave her. She brought her down the stairs, and all the morning Poppy lay on the couch, sometimes sleeping, sometimes wailing, sometimes just lying, much to the still with her mother, mouth open and her breath coming in a short gaps. Lena and Mrs. Mrudo sat on the either side of her, putting the cool cloths on her forehead and trying to get her drink the water and the medicine the doctor provided. I don't know what causing this child fever, the doctor said. All I can do is try to bring it down. After all the walking of a day before, Lena was glad to sit still. She settled in the corner of the couch, her legs tucked under her, and watched the doctor ditcher about. She seems to have 100 things to do and 100 things on her mind. She had stand for a second staring into the air, murmuring to herself, now all right, first I must look up, and then dart over to her enormous book and shuffle through its pages. After a second or two, she suddenly set the book down and hurry up to the kitchen, where she would take a bottle of a liquid of a jar of a powder down from a shelf and measure some of it to the pot. Or she would dash out to the garden and come back with an armload of onion. Or she had vanished out the back door and appear again with a sheaf of an dried stream of leaves. It was hard to tell that what she was doing, or if she was really accomplishing anything at all. Every now and then she would be come back to Poppy and spoon some medicine into her mouth or put a cold, damp cloth on her forehead. What is that enormous book? Lena asked her. Oh, said the doctor. She always seems a little started to be spoken to. Well, it is about medicine. A lot of it is useless, though. She picked up the book from the fourth floor and drifted pages. You look up infection and it says prescribe antibodies. What are antibodies? Or you look up for the fever and it says give aspirin. Aspirin is some kind of a painkiller, I think, but we don't have it. We had aspirin in Ember, said Mrs. Mrudo rather proudly, although I believed it had nearly run out of by the end. Is that so? Said the doctor. Well, we have is a plant, herbs, roots, funguses, that sort of thing. I have a couple of old books that tells about which one to use. Sometimes they work, sometimes they doesn't. She ran a hand through her shorts, wiry hair making it poke out on one side. So much to know, she said, and so much to do. Her voice trailed off. I suppose your son is help to you, said Mrs. Muro. My son? The boy Torrent? Oh, said the doctor, Hester. He is not my son. He is not, said Lena. No, no, the doctor said. Torrent and his brother Caspar, they were my sister's boy. They live with me because their parents were killed in an avalanche years ago. They were in the mountains on an ice gathering trips, and the boy had no other relative, said Mrs. Mrudo. He had an uncle, said the doctor, but the uncle didn't want the trouble of bringing up the boys. He offered to have their houses built for me. If I would take them on, the doctor shrugged. So I did. What is an abundance? Lena asked. What are the mountains? Lena said, Mr. Mrudo, it is not polite to ask too many questions. I don't mind, the doctor said. I forgot that you wouldn't know these things. You really lived under the ground. Yes, said Lena. Dr. Hester crunched her grey eyebrow together. But why would there be a city underground? Lena said she didn't know. All she knew was that where is a notebook she and Don had found on their way out. It was a journal kept out one of the first inhabitants of Ember, who told of 50 couples brought in from the outside world, each with the two babies to raise in an underground city. Though there was some danger, Lena said, they made Embers as a place to keep the people safe. It was that long ago, then, said the doctor, before the disaster. I don't know, said Lena. I guess so. What disaster? The disaster just about wiped out the human races, said Dr. Hester. I will tell you about it sometimes, but not right now. I have to go and see Bert Webb's infected fingers. Can I ask one more question? Said Lena. The doctor nodded. Why is this place called as Sparks? Oh, said the doctor, smiling a little. It was the people of an last Turk who gave it that name. Our 22 founders, they were among the very few people who survived the disaster. For a while they found the food by diving around from one place to another in the old tongs, using the cars and the trucks that still had a sort of energy, making a tuff called glassen, gas for short. Carson tax, thought Lena. Gasoline? But she didn't want to interrupt, so she didn't ask. When the food and the gas began to run out, the doctor went on. They decided it was time to start a new life somewhere else. They found one last Turk that still had the gas, and they have loaded it with the supplies of food, cans and the boxes, tools, cloths and the blankets, sheets, everything useful they could find. Then they drove east out across the empty land, staying close to the river right here. The truck broke down. When they opened the hood, a great spray of a spark shot up out the engine. So they decided to settle in this spot, and they named it as Sparks. The doctor stood up and looked around for his medicine bag. It turned out of an being fitting name in another way, he said. Sparks are our beginning. We are the beginning of something here, or trying to be, the way a spark is the beginning of a fire. But fires are terrible, said Lena. Terrible or wonderful, said the doctor, who had found her bag behind a chair and was heading out the door. They can go either way. Lena never did go down to the plaza that day. She didn't think Doon would worry. He knew Poppy was sick, and he would figure out that Lena had staying with her. She would go and look for him tomorrow, she decided, and found out that was happening to the people of Ember. Late in the afternoon, Lena went outside and sat on an rickety bench in the courtyard of the doctor's house, waiting to see if anyone was going to make the dinner. It seems unlikely. The doctor was off treating someone's toothache, and Mrs. Mrudo was up in the loft with Poppy, who had started crying an hour ago and still had not stopped. A door opened and Torrent came outside. He shanted over to Lena and stood in front of her. Your sister is probably going to die, he said. Lena jerked back. She is not. Torrance shrugged. Look like it to me, he said. Looked to me like she had the plague. He sat down on a wooden chair where he could stare straight into the Lena's face. He was wearing a sort of underskirt. It was white and looked like a sack with a hole for a neck and arm, and the thin legs stuck out from the baggy, short of and same material. He has combed his hair so that it stood up like a tuft to the grass at the top of his forehead, making his long, narrow face look even longer. I don't know what you're talking about, Lena said. You don't know about the three plagues, said the Tauren in a tone of an extorted surprises, or the four wars. You never heard of the disaster. I have heard of it, said Lena, but I don't know what it is. I don't know about anything here. Well then, I will tell you, he said. You can't go around being so ignorant. She said nothing. She didn't like this boy's superior attitude, but she wanted to know everything there was to know. She would tell him that, but she wasn't going to ask him. It was a long time ago, he said. He spoke in an precise teacher's voice. There was a million of people in the world then. They all were genius. They could make their own voices travel around the world, and they could see the people who were the miles away. They could fly. He paused, waiting no doubt for Lena to be amazed. She was amazed, but she wasn't going to show it. Besides, he was probably lying. She just nodded. They could make the music come down out of the air. Then they had 1,000 of smooth roads and could not anywhere they wanted really fast. They had the pictures that moved. He waited again. He took a few apricot pits from his pocket and rattled them idly in the palm of his hand. All right, she would ask. What do you mean, pictures that move? Didn't think you know that one. Torrance said with a tight little smile. They are huge pictures taller than a house. They were called as movies. You would look at the wall and see a story happening on it, with the voice and the other sounds. How do you know all this? Said Lena. She thought that he might easily be making it up. We learn it in the school, said Torrent. They teach us a lot about the old times, so we won't forget. Have you seen a moving picture then? Of course not, he said. You have to have an electricity. There hasn't been any for a long time. He shoved one of the pits at a bird that was about to drink from the water dish. The splash scared it away. We had electricity, Lena said, glad to score a point over him. We had it in Ember until it ran out. We had a street light and lamps in our houses and the electric stoves in the kitchen. For a moment, Torrent looked dismayed. But did you have the movies? He said. Lena shook her head away. Anyway, she said, what does all this have to do with my sister? I'm going to tell you about if you had just let me. The important tone came back into his voice. So there were all these billions of people, but there go to be too many of them. They messed up the world. That was why the three plagues came. But before the three plagues, they had the four wars. Once again he paused and looked at her with its infracturing away, lifting his thin eyebrow. Just tell me, she said. Don't look at me like that. You don't know about the four wars. No wars. What's that? A war is when one bunch of a people fights with the another bunch. When both of them wants the same thing, like for the instance, if there is something good land and two groups of a people want to live there. Why can't they both live there? They don't have to live there together, he said, as if it were a stupid question. Also, you could have a war because of a revenge. Say one group of a people does something bad to the another group, like steal like their chickens. Then the first group does something bad back in an revenge. That could start a war. the two groups would try to kill each others, and the one who killed the most will win. They would kill each others over chickens. That is just an example. In the Fourth War, they were fighting over bigger things, like we should get some big chunks of the land, or whether you should believe in this god or that god, or who got to have the gold and the oil. All of this was enormously confusing to Linda. She didn't know the meaning of God or gold, and she wasn't sure what he is meant by oil. You mean, she said, thinking of the jar that had once been stocked in the storeroom of Hembar, the king of oil you cooked with. Torrent rolled his eyes. You really don't know anything, he said. He flung the rest of a pitch he was holding at the three little red-headed birds, picking at the weed between the bricks, and the birds scattered cheeping. This was really beautiful, valuable oil. Everyone wanted it, and there is one wasn't enough of it to go around, so they fought over it. They hit each other's much more than that, said Torrent. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and in a low, husky voice told Lena about the weapon they had had in those days, the guns that led you to kill the people without even getting near them, and the bomb that could flatten and burn the whole city at once. They set the cities on a fire all over the world, Torrent said. His small eyes glittered, and afterwards came the plague. I don't know what a plague, Lena said. A sickness, said Torrent, the kind where one person catches it from the other person and it spread around fast before you can stop it. We had one of these, Lena said, the coughing sickness. It would come sometimes and kill a lot of people and then go away again. We had three, said Torrent, as if three plagues were better than one. There was the one we were wither away like you are starving to death, the one you feel like you are on the fire and you die of a heat, and the one where you suddenly can't breathe. No one knew where they came from. They just rose up and swept over the whole world like a wind. Lena shuddered. She was tired all at once of listening to Torrent, who took such a pleasure in describing the horrors and saying words she didn't understand. So Torrent stayed. The four wars and the three plagues, those together were the disaster. Then it finally got over with, and hardly any people were left. That is why we have to start all over again. He stood up and brushed away and at a twig that was clinging to his shorts. We don't have war anymore, he said. Our leaders say we must never have war again. And besides, Doon found Lena in the crowd, the first time he had seen her since they arrived. He told her about the Poiner Hotel. She told him about the Doors house and what she had learned from Torrent about the disaster. Lena and Mrs. Mrudo were told that they would be a team of two with the job of helping Dr. Hester. Since they were staying at her house, they were sent home, and all the work team went off to their first project, digging the hotel toilets. They went out into an scrubby woods behind the Poiner. The work leaders had brought picks and the shovels from the town. They gave each person a tool. You will dig 50 holes, one of the leaders said, each one 6 feet deep. Then you will build a shelter of a scarp, lumber around each one. But the people of Nembard had ever done much digging or picking. They had to be sure how to put a foot on a towel edge to drive it into the dirt, and how to lift the pick over their shoulders and bring it down hard. At first they scrapped and howled awkwardly at the hard, dry earth, grunting it with effort, dislodging only a few scrub of a dirt with each stroke. After 10 minutes of the hard work, they have made hardly more than swallow dips in the dirt. They were breathing fast. Do you say 6 feet deep? Someone called out. That's right, came the answer. So the Emberites set themselves to task, which was for most of them the hardest work they have ever done. After an hour, Doon had blisters on both the hands and kink in his necks. Some of the other had given up entirely and had fluttered down on the ground, dripping with the sweat and aching in every muscle. Doon made himself keep going, but he was glad when his work finally stopped at noon and the team leader marched them back into the town. He heard the people murmuring to each other as they walked. Do you think we will have to work like this every day? It will make us strong, I guess, or else kill us. Each team was assigned to a different household for lunch. Doon team went with the Patton family. Through the street of a village, they followed a short, cheerful woman named Martha Patton, whose wide weird end wagged from side to side as she walked. Don't look around the whole low ceiling room. At one end was a long wooden table, and at the other, a couple of benches stood before a nice in the two smoke stained walls. Sitting on the benches were two people who got up and came forward as Martha introduced them. My husband, Odney, Martha said. He was tall and narrow with a mustache like a brown toothbrush under his nose. And my son, Kingston. Kingston was a little younger than Doon. A skinny boy with a yellow hat, big ears, and a freckled nose. He kept his eyes on the floor, except for a couple of quick, curious glances. Hi, he said to the floor in a soft and shy voice. And these, Martha Patton said to her family, sweeping her arms in the direction of the guest. Are the people from underground? She raised her eyebrows at them. You are lucky to have find your way here, she said. The only other settlements we know are little miserable 100 of miles away. Everything else is just hard, rocky, dirt and ruins and the grasses. And you have not only came to the right place, added Odney. You have come at the right time. It has taken years of hard work, but Sparks is finally doing well. Now said Martha, clapping her hands. Time to eat. They sat down at a big table and Martha brought out the dishes of the food. I suppose you have never tasted anything like this, she said, handing around a bowl of fresh peas. Just picking this morning, and this is an pumpkin bread made from what I can of last year crop. Good, isn't it? Did you have pumpkin bread where you came from? No, indeed, said Doon's father. We did have peas, though, said Clary, grown in our greenhouses. And a very fine they were, said Mrs. Ploster loyally, though silently smaller than these. Probably you haven't had picked the carrots either, Martha said, passing the dish around. These are from my mother's famous recipe. We did have the carrots, said Mr. Ploster. A nice pale orange, some of them fully 4 inches long. Is that right? Said Martha. Ours are 12 inches usually. Miss Thorne picked a delicacy at her food, making a polite command now and then. Edward Pocket ate with such an vigorous appetite that he had no time for with such an talking. Kingston ate steadily and silently. Every time Doon glanced his way, he found the boy staring at him. But as soon as their eyes met, Kingston looked back on his plate. Orderly Patton cleared his throat. Apparently, this meant that he was going to speak, because his family all instantly looked at him. I never knew, he said, that there was a kind of a people who lived underground. Must feel strange to you have on the surface. Actually, said Doon, we aren't a different kind of a people. This place feels familiar in the way because we came from here originally. From here? Oh, I don't think so, said Martha. You don't look like a bit like us. You are so much, well, smaller, if you will pardon me saying so, and paler. True, said Clary, but I suppose that because of living in a dark place for so long, everything is bigger and brighter here. But why do you think that you came from here? Martha asked. Because of a notebook we found. Doon said. It was written by someone from this world who went in to live in Ember right at the beginning. All the people of an Ember came from this world. Is that so? Said Martha, eyeing Doon spectacly. Well, I must say, it is the strangest thing I have ever heard. Doon fathers changed the topic. You have such a fine, solid house, he said. What it is made of? Earth, said Martha. Pounded, said Odney. Strong as stone. Thick walls, said Martha. They made it cool in the hot weather and warm in the cold. She reached for another pickled carrot. I supposed you lived in what? Some sort of burrows. Stone houses, said Edward Pocket, suddenly joining the conversation because his plate was empty. 2 stories, extremely steady, never too warm. There was a silence. Such a lovely lunch, said Mr. Thorne in a small voice. Perfectly delicious, Mr. Ploster declared. The other chimed in, and Martha beamed. They all rose from the table. Martha clarified the kitchen and came out with a basket full of cloth wrapped parcel. She handed one to each of her guests. Your supper, she said, and breakfast. Thank you, said Dool's father. You are very generous. Thank you.